After an epic struggle, we have finally determined my favorite Warframe, and if you're not familiar with which one that is, you can check the video linked above or below. But lo and behold, my glorious supporter Isn't That Right has proposed a name for this Warframe. I think we're going to pronounce this Ayeeg? 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 Ayeeg. That is how I will say it, but I don't know if that's how you're supposed to say it. Isn't That Right says, this is a Lovecraftian entity capable of detaching her tentacles. Aha! And of course, we'll rate this glorious name on my 3 criteria, which are impact. How much does the name kind of punch in the gut? How much does it feel like an epic, badass name? Immersion. How much does it feel like a name that could be in the world of Warframe? And, of course, instruction. How much does this name give you the idea of the frame that you're going to be playing? Let's begin, shall we? Yes, so for impact, it's a very noticeable name. This is one of those, like, I kind of feel I want to stay away from it a little bit, give myself some space. It's a bit creepy, yes. But I do think that it's one of those names that, being that it is meant to be a sort of cryptic name, I do think that these names have somewhat limited impact when they're in the real world. One of the things about Lovecraftian folklore and style is that the entities are often so big as to be obscured. You often don't kind of fully see them. There's this idea in horror that, like, once you see the monster, it's not really scary anymore. It's what you're imagining it is a lot scarier than what it actually is. And so I do think that using a name for a sort of eldritch god as something you'll see does bring it down a little. But it is the kind of thing that I can imagine, like, if you didn't know that this was a Warframe and this was in the game, you would think, what on earth does that one do, So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. I think that it's okay. I like it better than average. Let's say it that way. Cool. Immersion. Yeah, I think this passes. I feel like this is a name that I could see being in Warframe. I feel like it's a little, like, we don't have names too much like this already, but I don't see why we couldn't. And having a Warframe that is as amalgamated as mine, think like we didn't really describe like what my favorite Warframe looks like, but imagine Zaku but turned up to 11. So, we amalgamated a bunch of frames together, but these abilities are just like nuts. We're talking Gauss, rocket boosters on the legs, but then crazy tentacles, a little bit like Lavos's design, upcoming Warframe Lavos, with the snakes all over the body, but, Hydra tentacles, definitely Hydroid beard, something like that still. You got the Necros chains hanging off of everywhere. I think this would be a good Warframe to have them be, like, bound by chains, like have chains wrapped around them instead. This is the edgiest design ever, but I'm doing it on the spot, so what do you want from me? Hildren, I don't know. That'll be more boosters, but then just wrapped in, like, chained together, like to hold the force of all of this power together. Of course, we have to have chains and tentacles and stuff. So this will be a Warframe that really looks like a semi-infested mass more than others. And so I can see this being this name for a Warframe that looks like this Warframe of mine might. I feel like that's pretty good. I'm going to say 4 out of 5 for that one. I feel like it could be a name that could feel immersive in Warframe. It could. Probably not in the current version of the game, but I don't see why you couldn't push the game in that direction without fundamentally changing what it was. And finally, instruction. I think this one is okay. It does give the impression of tentacles. Obviously, you're focusing on the tentacle swarm, pilfering swarm thing. And I think that Desecrate, Despoil is like sort of Eldritch Gaudy. I kind of get that as well. So I think I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for that one. I feel like it's pretty good, but not amazing. It doesn't evoke the technological intensity of the frame as well. We really have, like, Hildren Pillage and Gauss's Mach Rush are very tech names, very nitty-gritty nuts and bolts kind of abilities, very machine-like abilities, and it doesn't evoke that at all. It's like the exact opposite of that, which is fine. And the Warframe is a Warframe that is scary, eldritch, like death machine. So it's totally fine for it to be named something that seems biological. However, I don't think that this evokes the gameplay too directly. It does evoke sort of horror, death mastery, the passive, I guess, and the tentacle swarm, obviously. Overall aggregate score, we have 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, and 3 out of 5 for a grand total of 10 out of 15. Pretty good. Yeah, I like this one. I think that I have a bit of a weakness for Lovecraftian horror, not because I like it so much, but because I think it's a very good benchmark. It's one of those things where it really is a style that is relatively easy to define. Like, you can tell people what it is without much difficulty. And so I like that. I feel like it does a good job getting people in the door, and like you can quickly explain what it is, and then it's a good benchmark for like, do you like this kind of thing or not? Very similar to, I think, Cyberpunk, not just because that game is coming out, but over the past couple of decades has become a term that is a pretty usable benchmark. People kind of know what it is. There's plenty of high profile examples. It's something you can use to describe an aesthetic relatively effectively that isn't simply fantasy or sci-fi. It's like something a bit more specific than those, but still really distinct. And personally, I guess the writer in me really likes terms like that. In addition, I think that it's a good base aesthetic. I think this type of thing on its own is not always my cup of tea, but it has inspired a great many things that I think are good ideas that are more than the sum of their parts. So anyway, the score aside, we're just doing that for a bit of fun. I simply enjoy the idea of adding some eldritch horror to Warframe, and I think that it's not entirely outside the scope of Warframe's story. I think the Sentients have a sort of weird, like, mecha eldritch horror thing going on that could be really interesting. I also think like a very tiny spoiler, but like Hun Hao, sentient Hun Hao, when we saw that, did we see that? But that kind of gave me some eldritch horror, looked at by a space god kind of vibes. So anyway, cool stuff. Thank you very much for your glorious suggestion.